In 2018, I was a senior in college, and Halloween was just around the corner. My days were filled with the usual, cramming for finals, late-night coffee runs, and hanging out with my best friend Cody whenever our schedules aligned. That particular year, my friend Tracy invited me to a Halloween party her sorority was throwing. It was supposed to be one of those wild, anything-goes kind of nights. She told me I could bring a friend, and without a second thought, I chose Cody. But there was one catch. He had to work late, and that meant he wouldn't have time to buy a costume. Since I was the one free during the day, I volunteered to pick up costumes for both of us. Spirit Halloween was just a short drive from my apartment, and I figured it would be a quick trip. Grab something cheesy and head back home. Cody and I had already decided on a simple duo. I'd be a vampire, and he'd be a zombie. Basic, nothing too flashy, but enough to blend into the party. The store wasn't busy when I arrived, which was a relief. Halloween was only a few days away, so I expected the place to be swarming with last-minute shoppers. As I browsed through the aisles, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an odd sterile glow on the fake blood and plastic masks. There was a slight chill in the air, one that didn't quite fit the heated space, but I ignored it, focusing on finding the right costumes. That's when I met him, Mike, the cashier. He stood behind the counter with an awkward posture, his balding head barely visible over the clutter of props and costume accessories. He looked like he belonged in one of those creepy horror movie scenes, receding hairline, wire-rimmed glasses, and a too small polo shirt stretched over a potbelly. His presence unnerved me almost instantly, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I found the costumes I needed and headed for the register. As I approached, I noticed Mike watching me, his eyes following my every move with a strange intensity. I tried to act casual, pulling out my phone to text Cody and let him know I had everything. Mike leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter, and smiled. An unnatural, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Big party tonight?" he asked. I glanced up, startled. "Yeah, something like that." He nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Sorority, right? Lot of girls at those parties." My stomach twisted. How did he know? I hadn't mentioned anything about a sorority. Still, I shrugged, trying to brush off the question. "Yeah, it's supposed to be fun," I replied, keeping my tone light. My phone buzzed. Cody was calling. I answered quickly, eager for an excuse to escape the conversation. As I talked to Cody, telling him about the costumes and the party, I noticed Mike's attention had shifted entirely to my conversation. He was listening, leaning in slightly as if trying to catch every word. His interest felt invasive, but I kept my focus on the call, telling Cody I'd meet him later that night. When I hung up, Mike cleared his throat. "So, is it an open invite?" The question hung in the air like a bad smell. I didn't know how to respond. His curiosity had turned from awkward to outright creepy, but I didn't want to make a scene. No, it's a private thing," I mumbled, pulling out my wallet to pay. Mike didn't stop there. "Shame," he said, his gaze lingering a little too long. "Sounds like a good time. You know, with all those girls." His voice dropped when he said it, almost conspiratorially, like we were sharing some kind of secret. My skin crawled, but I forced a laugh, taking my receipt as quickly as possible. Just as I turned to leave, Mike stretched out his hand. "I'm Mike, by the way. You know, in case you ever need help with anything around here." His hand hung in the air between us, and I hesitated. Something about the way he said it, the way his fingers twitched slightly, made my stomach churn. But not shaking his hand felt like it would make things even weirder. So reluctantly, I reached out and shook it. It was cold, damp, and he held it just a second too long. I muttered a quick goodbye and left, the encounter leaving me unsettled, though I tried to shrug it off. It was just some awkward guy, I told myself. I had a party to get to, and I wasn't going to let some weird interaction ruin the night. Cody and I arrived at the sorority house around 10 p.m. The party was already in full swing, the bass of the music vibrating through the walls, and people were spilling out into the front yard, laughing, drinking, and dressed in ridiculous costumes. For a while, it was exactly what I expected. Cheap beer, bad dancing, and college kids making the most of Halloween. But sometime around midnight, the atmosphere shifted. I was by the makeshift bar when I heard a commotion near the entrance. A girl, clearly upset, was asking around for Tracy, looking panicked. I moved closer, straining to hear. She was talking about some older guy dressed as a cowboy, someone who had been creeping around the party and trying to lead girls into empty rooms. The description sent a chill down my spine. He touched one of the girls, tried to drag her upstairs, she said, her voice shaking. Then he just left, took something with him. I felt my chest tighten. The cowboy costume, the behavior, the man she described sounded exactly like Mike. I hadn't mentioned the encounter at Spirit Halloween to anyone, not even Cody, but now the image of his awkward, unsettling smile was fresh in my mind. Could it really be him? The party was ruined after that. The carefree energy vanished, replaced with tension. Cody and I left around 12:30, both of us silent as we walked to my car. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. But the worst part? As we drove home, I noticed a car following us. The same car, taking every turn we did. Cody sat beside me, unaware at first, scrolling through his phone. But I couldn't ignore it. The car behind us had been tailing us for blocks, making every single turn we did. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, and my heart started to race. "Cody," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "do me a favor and check the rearview mirror." He glanced up, squinting into the mirror. "What? What am I looking for?" Is there a car behind us?" He craned his neck, leaning closer to the dashboard. "Yeah. Why?" My stomach dropped. "I think it's following us." Cody turned in his seat, looking over his shoulder to get a better view. "Seriously? What makes you think that? We've been making random turns for the last 10 minutes, and it's still back there," I said, trying to keep calm. "I think it's Mike, from the store." "Mike?" Cody's eyebrows shot up in confusion, but then I saw the realization dawn on his face. I hadn't told him the details of my creepy interaction at Spirit Halloween, but when I mentioned Mike, something clicked. "That guy from the store?" Cody sounded incredulous. "The weird one." "Yeah, I don't know why, but I think it's him." Cody stared out the back window, trying to make out the driver through the darkness. "Man, pull over. Let's see if he stops." I hesitated, the weight of anxiety pressing down on me. Was I overreacting? Could it just be some random car coincidentally going the same way? But my gut screamed that something was off, so I decided to follow Cody's advice. I pulled over to the side of the road, the dim streetlights casting long shadows over the asphalt. My car idled quietly, but the tension inside was suffocating. We waited, watching the car behind us. For a moment, it seemed like the driver might pass us, but at the last second, they slowed down. The car lingered for what felt like an eternity, crawling past us at a snail's pace. I could barely make out the silhouette of the driver through the tinted windows, but I knew. I just knew it was him. Then, without warning, the car sped off. Cody and I sat there, frozen for a few seconds, watching the taillights disappear into the distance. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat louder than the last. "That was definitely him," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Yeah, no doubt," Cody muttered, his voice a little shaken now too. "What the hell does he want?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the night wasn't supposed to be like this. We were supposed to be out having fun, not dodging some creepy stalker. After a few minutes, we decided to head home. I dropped Cody off at his apartment, both of us on edge but trying to convince ourselves that Mike wouldn't come back, that he was just some weirdo trying to mess with us. But as I drove back to my place, that unsettling feeling wouldn't go away. The roads were quiet, eerily so, and I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see the car again. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, my nerves were shot. I parked in the lot, scanning the area for any sign of the car, but nothing seemed out of place. I locked my doors as soon as I got inside and checked the windows repeatedly before finally settling into bed. I was exhausted, but sleep didn't come easy that night. Every sound outside, every creak, every rustle of leaves set my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mike was out there, watching, waiting. The next morning I woke up groggy, but the events of the previous night were still fresh in my mind. Cody and I texted back and forth, debating whether we should call the police. But what would we say? We didn't have any proof that it was Mike, just a gut feeling and some creepy behavior. It wasn't enough to file a report. Still, something had to be done. I couldn't let this slide. I decided to call Spirit Halloween and speak to a manager. Maybe they could look into Mike's behavior, at least warn the other employees. When I dialed the number, my hands were shaking, but I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. Spirit Halloween, how can I help you? A cheery voice answered on the other end. Hi, I was in the store yesterday, and I had an interaction with one of your employees. I just wanted to report it. It was really uncomfortable. There was a brief pause before the woman replied. I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me which employee? His name was Mike, I said, hoping that would be enough to identify him. Silence. The kind of silence that feels like a weight pressing down on your chest. Mike? She finally said, her voice sounding confused. Are you sure about that? Yeah, definitely. Older guy, receding hairline, glasses. He was the cashier yesterday. Another long pause. We don't have anyone by that name working here, she said slowly, her voice tinged with concern. And from your description, it doesn't match any of our staff. A chill ran down my spine. No, I'm sure it was him. He was working the register. I've been the manager here for the past 3 weeks, and we've never had anyone like that, she insisted. Are you sure it was our store? My head spun. I'd been certain, completely certain, that the guy who sold me the costumes was a legitimate employee. How could he not be? He was behind the counter. He rang up my items, unless he wasn't supposed to be there. I thanked her awkwardly and hung up, my mind racing. If Mike wasn't an employee, then who the hell was he? And what was he doing in the store? I stared out the window of my apartment, half expecting to see his car parked in the lot, watching me again. But the street was empty. That's when it hit me. He didn't need to find out where I lived. He'd already known. The rest of that day was a blur. I couldn't focus, couldn't shake the paranoia gnawing at me. I checked the locks on my door over and over, expecting him to show up at any moment. But he never did. In the end, I never found out who Mike really was or what he wanted. But I can tell you this much. I've never stepped foot in another Spirit Halloween since. And every Halloween night, I still glance over my shoulder, waiting for that car to appear again. Because I know deep down that he's still out there.